Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me in another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those wondering why we might pair Avowed with Pillars of Eternity, first off, welcome to the show, happy to have you here. The reason is that they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And so, as the theory goes, and why this show exists, is that if we dive into those Pillars games, we can understand the world a little bit better and appreciate the nuances of the writing that Avowed is truly to have. As well, it's just a way for those of us who love Pillars of Eternity to geek out about a world we already know and love, or revisit if you're returning after a while. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about unique items within the Pillars of Eternity game and Avowed, and what they are, how they work, and what's the lore behind why they are the way they are. This is an episode that, embarrassingly for me, I haven't done earlier, not because this is a big topic, but because I never actually sat down to think about why do the unique items in Pillars of Eternity have item descriptions about lore within the world? Like, why do they tell stories the way they do? I think I took it for granted because I've played a lot of games where that is just the case, right? Like, I played Destiny for a very long time, and for anyone else who've played Destiny, you'll know that a lot of the weapon and armor sets in that game have lore within their descriptions, especially the more rare finds, especially like the exotics and whatnot. You'll also see this in a lot of FromSoft games where there are just item descriptions on items that tell you about the world, and I think this is just something that's normal. And I don't 100% know if this was baked into Pillars of Eternity or not, but there is kind of a lore reason why you might get some of the stories that we get from these unique items when we look at their item description. Especially in Pillars of Eternity, with our character being a watcher, but I'm going to explain what I mean in a second. No news to go over today. We're just getting ready for Avowed to come out or any new updates to happen, so we can just dive straight into today's lore.
I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
So for those not familiar, in Pillars of Eternity and many other video games, especially RPGs, there are unique items in the world. And when I say unique item, what I mean is a specific variant of regular items like weapons or armor that has a unique name and usually has a unique trait. If you've played any of the Bethesda games, you'll be very familiar with unique weapons and armor. Same with Obsidian games. You have your, let's say, regular swords and shields and bows and arrows and whatnot. But then there'll be these unique ones that have their own name, and they are still within the category of some of these things. Like you might pick up a unique sword, but the sword will have a different name than all the other swords you've seen so far. And when you read the item description, it has a little bit more flavor and lore to the item description than just a common sword, for example. On pillarsofeternity.fandom.com, because why not, I'll just do this here, a unique item is described as having a non-generic name and can not be obtained more than once in the whole game. So that's a pretty good description for what a unique item is. They are rarer than common magical items, but less scarce than soulbound items, which are also unique items. I will say soulbound items, as far as I know anyways, are unique in this world in that there's only one of each soulbound item. They are just a higher tier version of a unique item. They're even more rare to find. Soulbound items are items that level up as you use them, right? So if you have a soulbound sword, the more you use it, and if you complete certain tasks with it, it'll get into higher tiers of power. But it is tied to only that one character to use it, right? So if you give your sword to a member of your party, if you want that sword to continue to level up in strength, or enchantments or whatever, you have to leave it with that one character. Breaking the soul bond between the wielder and the owner starts that process over again. Most unique items are enchanted with unique enchantments. They cannot be created by the player. There is a crafting system within Pillars of Eternity, and it looks like Avowed as well. The unique enchantments are things that you cannot craft. They are unique to those items. And by having the word unique, obviously, you can't just recreate those into other things. We don't 100% know for sure if that's going to happen in Avowed, but it seems likely. So just as an example of what I mean here, let's go with the first one that I can find on the list here called a Spearcaster. So in Pillars of Eternity 2, there is a weapon. This is in the Arbalist category, so this weapon is an Arbalist, and it's called Spearcaster. And if you open the item up in your inventory, you'll be able to read this description. The product of a wizard who considered himself an engineer, this Arbalist has been modified to fire larger, thicker bolts. This provides no shortage of obstacles in its initial construction. The wizard found he needed to strengthen the bow lathes to accommodate the oversized bolts. Thus, a heavier string was required. As a result, the retaining nut had to be reinforced. Even a customized, enchanted windlass was needed to span the blasted thing. The stock itself was initially too weak for the whole operation, and the wizard, ever the pragmatist, found structural enchantments were required to keep the weapon from snapping in two once armed. Runes etched into the massive spear-like bolts helped them fly true and give them a punch to puncture steel and flesh. However, the wizard found it took considerable expenditures of his own arcane powers to make them do so. In the end, the weapon, while powerful, seemed only of use to those with sufficient knowledge of arcana. As such, the wizard abandoned his plans to produce similar weapons en masse and kept this prototype for his personal use. So this is an example of a unique item. You're not going to find that item description on any other item out there. And we can see that it has some aspects to it that are rather common with unique items. There's sometimes a description of how the thing is. So for example, this is a Arbalist that is supposed to be basically twice as powerful as normal Arbalists. And this first paragraph that I read describes how this wizard managed to create it. So they had to make thicker bolts. They had to get a bigger string. They needed twice the size of this or that, and a reinforced nut, and all these different aspects that had to be considered to make this thing bigger. As well, there's also magic involved to hold this entire thing together, because otherwise it would fall apart. So there's the description of how this thing came to exist. That isn't going to happen in every single unique item, but usually there is some form of an origin story with a lot of these items. As well, there's usually a person involved. So in this case, we get an unnamed wizard. Quite often, we'll hear stories of people, whether named or not named, on how they came to acquire this thing, how they came to build it, what their personal tie is to these items. And lastly, we'll usually get some kind of lore, even if you had to read between the lines a little bit. In this particular example, you do have to read between the lines, but you can learn a little bit about how magic can be used within this world, such as etching runes on a weapon to ensure that it can hold together. That's something that magic can do. That also means magic can have like a permanence to it, that it will stay on an object and might not leave, which is true of pretty much all enchantments. But the question might pop up in the mind of those who want to immerse in this world of how does that work, right? Like, how do these things gain this power? In the case of the Spearcaster, it was built to be more powerful, and it uses magic to hold itself together. But in other unique items, you'll notice that it has a magical ability all on its own. Like, it shoots out something, or you hit someone with something, and it lights them on fire, for example. What's causing that to happen? The answer with anything magical in this world has to do with the soul. Specifically, the stuff that souls are made of, which is called essence within this world. Souls are a very real thing in the world of Eora. You have a soul, I have a soul, the rocks have a soul, animals have a soul. In fact, there is soul essence, the soul energy essence, this stuff that we call essence anyways, is actually even floating around ambient in the air. It's accessible through this kind of in-between metaphysical layer of the world called the in-between, which is the in-between layer from the here and now, where you and I are, and the beyond, where we go after we die. I've done an entire episode on the soul if you want to check it out. It's one of the earlier episodes in this podcast life. If you're new to the show and you listen to episode 0, you'll be able to get a list of good episodes to listen to if you want some foundational lore. But all things magic come down to essence. And essence, again, is the stuff that souls are made out of, sometimes referred to as soul energy or spiritual power. And essence has an innate power to it, and it's essence that actually powers and makes able magical things and effects and abilities. It's from manipulating and using essence in some way, shape, or form that we're actually able to do magic within this world. And because essence is tied to our soul, which is tied very closely to our personhood, specifically consciousness and memory and personality, we can also imprint essence on items and objects. And I don't know if it says anywhere outright in the lore. If anyone knows, please let me know. As far as I can tell, there isn't anything that says in the lore how unique items come to be. But I think it's pretty obvious to see when you're more familiar with this lore that unique items in this world are simply items that have essence imbued into them. Not just in the sense of like, oh, I have put this arcane rune onto this spearcaster, but in some instances, there are items that literally have an imprint of a person's soul, and so a little bit of their essence on the actual object themselves. And that soul essence in these unique items is what's causing some of these magical effects to happen. And a lot of these moments where unique items are created, they can be created purposefully, or they can even be created accidentally when someone is in a very extreme moment, and perhaps they are very charged with a powerful emotion, and that allows them to imprint some of their essence. Or perhaps they appeal to one of the gods, and one of the gods uses essence within the world to bless an object. So it is essence being infused or imbued on an object that gives it its unique trait. At least that's how I'm understanding it. If anyone out there is having a different interpretation of how these items are coming to be, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. But that's my understanding of how unique items are being created. And this is why I think we also often see stories associated with unique items in Pillars of Eternity. You'll find that's a common motif, and I already mentioned it, how when you're reading these item descriptions for these unique items, that we get the story of this unique person that lived within history. And I always wondered why. I personally thought it was just the way Obsidian like to do things, that, oh, we just like to tell the stories of these random people in history. But I think there's a purpose behind it, in that it is those people who imbued this object with essence in the first place, or at least part of their memory is there. And that's why we're able to actually learn about these specific people when we have these unique items. And a large reason that I think we are able to do that is because in the Pillars of Eternity game, you are what is considered a watcher. A watcher, according to the fandom website, is an exceptionally gifted individual capable of perceiving the souls of others and interacting with them, both as a passive observer, thus the name, and as an active participant, affecting their essence. So a watcher, in a sense, has a sixth sense for essence. They are able to actually perceive it in some way. Quite often this appears in the form of what might look like hallucinations, but they can do more than just see and perceive essence. They are actually able to directly manipulate essence. And I think that you, being a watcher in the Pillars of Eternity games, you're able to see the soul essence that is within these unique items. And that's why you're able to almost soak in some of the memory of these unique items. I think this also explains why it appears different in Avowed so far. Now, to be fair, we haven't seen a ton of examples within Avowed already, so perhaps unique items will be a lot more like Pillars when we do play Avowed. But so far, based off what I've seen, it does seem to be a little bit different, almost like it tastes different. There's still unique lore, there's still unique descriptions, there's still unique information found within these unique items in Avowed, or so it seems, but it does seem to focus a little bit more on the how this item came into existence, or justifying this item's existence. And at first I was a little bit bothered by that, but when I think about it a bit more, it is also consistent with the different characters we have. In Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, your character being a watcher, you could actually soak in some of the memory of the people who created these items. In Avowed, though, granted we don't know a lot about the Envoy, but as far as we know, the Envoy isn't a watcher, which means your character isn't going to be able to soak in the memory to that same degree. Obviously, our character is very powerful, and they can wield magic, so perhaps they're able to get some information, and that's why we see the info we see. But there does seem to be a difference in the depth of what we get for information. Again, this isn't bad. I just think it's different. It's a different approach. And I'll give some examples of what I mean. So I'm going to use 2 examples from Pillars of Eternity series of unique items, and then we're going to look at some of the items from the Avowed series and kind of contrast the differences there. kind of lining up with my two previous episodes on Saint Wywyn and the Saints War and the Dozens and the Godhammer Bomb, I have two unique items here that are kind of related to that I'll talk about here. This first item is called 1 Dozen Stood, and it is plate armor that we get from the Beast of Winter DLC, which is a DLC from the second Pillars game. The item description reads, "Blackened and scored, this heavy plate bears the mark of a master metalworker of New Dunreed, the name of the Deerwooden capital of Defiance Bay prior to the revolution that freed it from the Adirans." So already we're getting some history on this item based on where it's from. Now, this information might be just well known to people who know like good armor, be like, oh, this is of Deerwooden make, or this has clearly got the signature style of someone from New Dunreed, right? So this information might not be getting soaked into the Watcher through the essence, but it also could be, right? Like, so I'm not saying every single piece of information in here is from that, but a little bit later on in this description, you'll see kind of what I'm getting at. The symbol of Mogren's flame graces the breastplate and pauldrons, barely visible under the wear the steel has suffered. So this first paragraph I've just finished reading is all about the description of the object itself, giving it some unique flair and style that you, the reader, can understand. But then the second paragraph goes into a little bit more of a description of the wearer of this armor. The youngest of the dozen, Easily of Balereach, had served the Duke for 5 years, and her Earl back home for a decade before that. A deft hand with a blade and a fervent believer in the details of Mogren, Easily seemed an obvious choice when she volunteered to help hold the bridge. The Duke granted her a small panoply for the encounter, including a battle-worn suit of plate armor that had been gathering dust in the Shrine of Mogren. Though details of the battle are scarce, this is a certainty. After the explosion of the Godhammer, nothing of Easily or her armor remained. So you might be asking, well, how did I manage to get this item to read about? Like, how do you get this item and read about its description if there was nothing left of it that remained? And if you want to answer that question, I highly recommend listening to my previous episode or the previous two episodes, if you can, to understand a lot about what the Godhammer Bomb is and how it exploded at a place called Yvondour Bridge. Suffice it to say, you acquire this armor through a paradoxical situation, and I'm not going to spoil any quests for you. You'll just have to play the game if you want to understand that, or listen to those previous episodes. Either way, there's some interesting information with this unique item. We learn about a person named Easily of Balereach, who is the youngest of the dozen. The dozen were a group of soldiers in a war that sacrificed their lives for the victorious moment of the war. Basically, they wanted to kill the leader of an imposing army, and they needed to coax that person to a particular place to blow them up with a massive bomb known as the Godhammer Bomb. And these 12 people that volunteered to give their lives to stage this ambush, they were called the Dozen. And the youngest of the dozen is Easily of Balereach. And we have a little bit of information here of them serving a duke for 5 years, and that they served their earl back home for a decade before that. And we learn about them being deft with a blade, etc., etc. We get all this flavored information. Now, certainly it is possible that this person is just well known within history, so perhaps Obsidian is kind of assuming in the background that you, the Watcher character, maybe you do some research on this item that you're holding, and you learn that it was owned by this person, and you learn these things in the background, so that they're not making you actively research this stuff about these unique items that you have. You're just learning about them as you go. Obsidian's kind of just assuming your player's doing it in the background. Or, if you're going with the theory I have, your Watcher character is literally absorbing some of the memory of this item, where it's from, who owned it, who created it. You're literally soaking in the memory of the essence that is infused onto this object. Again, I haven't confirmed that this is true. This is just kind of my intuition linking these two ideas together, and this seems to be a pretty good example of that. The next item I'll use as an example is a weapon. This is also from the second Pillars of Eternity game, and the item is called Dragon's Dowry. This is an arquebus. The item description reads, Rufus Aikmont, elder gunsmith in the Forged in Fire, a militant Magronite warband, crafted this arquebus for his own use during the Saints' War. Unwilling to trust his life to a weapon unless it had the blessing of Mogren, he melded fire and steel into an instrument of blazing destruction. So again, here's that motif that I've mentioned before of like talking about who created the object or where it came from, what its origins are. And here we learn about a guy named Rufus Aikmont, who is a Mogranite militant, and he crafted this arquebus for his own use in the Saints' War, which is the war I was referring to earlier with the dozen. He wanted this object blessed by Mogran, which is the goddess of fire and war, and so that's what he tries to do with it. The gun's firing mechanism is unique, as it does not rely on flint or match to spark the pan. Instead, ornate arcane symbols on the hammer and frizzen provide the necessary ignition for the primer. This rune lock, as Rufus called it, is effective and reliable. Dragon's Dowry fires lead balls wreathed in fire. When loaded with rune powder, it can belch forth a torrent of pure flame. So in the second paragraph, we are seeing a bit of an explanation of how this thing works, like what makes this unique mechanically speaking, and what's the reasoning behind those mechanics. And in this particular instance, we learned that it does not fire like a normal arquebus does, which would rely on flint or matches to spark the pan. And it gives an explanation of what a rune lock is, even though it isn't a real thing. And this is information that, again, your watcher theoretically could look up in the background, or perhaps someone tells him something like that, but it seems more compelling to me that this particular, like, very specific information is something that you learn as you soak in the memory of this thing, of like, I see the memory held within this object, I see the essence, and I have the memories of Rufus Aikmont inside me, and I know something about a rune lock, and how it is unique for this weapon because this weapon isn't using flint or match to light the pan. And, like, your watcher character is just kind of remembering almost as it soaks this item in, especially the more you use it theoretically. The last paragraph says, unfortunately, the unstable magics that provide such power are unpredictable. On occasion, hot powder can blow backwards upon firing, burning the shooter. Rufus saw this not as a drawback of his creation, but as just offering to Mogran. The burns that pocked his cheeks, hands, and arms were symbols of his penitence and his god's good favor. This last part here has to do a lot more with lore. It does explain a little bit some of the penalties that the weapon has, but this is a chicken or the egg scenario. Did they create the lore to explain the game mechanics that they've applied to this weapon, or did they apply those game mechanics because of what they wrote here? This last paragraph has a lot more to do with lore. It expounds on a little bit more of the theology behind Mogran. Mogran, as I mentioned, is the goddess of fire and war, but she's also the goddess of things like trials and suffering, but why those are, from a positive perspective. And they even talk about it here, that this weapon, on occasion, because it's unpredictable, can blow hot powder backwards upon the shooter, thus burning them. But Rufus, being a Mogranite, would not see this necessarily as a bad thing. He would say, well, this is just some of your trials and some of your suffering that you have to go through for life to become what you are, to become a better version of yourself. And he sees the scars that he gets from using this weapon as penitence in his faith for his god's good favor. So there's a little bit more lore in there that meets the eye. You got to read between the lines a little bit. You got to understand a little bit more about Mogran, but it's definitely there. So these are a couple of examples of unique items that we see in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. And there's a variety of types, and they kind of have a lot of these same flavors to them in terms of origin and either being wielded or be created by a certain person, and there being lore. And again, I suppose your player character could be researching all of this stuff, but it seems more intuitive to me that they are soaking in the memory of these things, especially considering how many unique items you get across the games. Now, I want to contrast this with some items that we see in the game of Avowed, at least during the gameplay demo. For example, we have a unique accessory. It's labeled as unique accessory, so I'm assuming that it is a unique item. It also has a gold plating around the icon for it, so I'm assuming it's a unique item in the way we've been describing them so far. It has a unique trait called Long for Embrace, which, when you're standing close to a companion, slowly restores your essence. Essence is what you use in Avowed to power your magical abilities. And you can read this item description, which again is going to be unique for this item. You're not going to see it on any other item itself. The item description reads, "This gold crescent moon pin is a particularly fine example of the charms worn by Vailian courtesans. Some say the trinkets protect against the hazards of their work. Others claim they make their time with their patrons more enjoyable. Whether true or not, you do feel strangely invigorated when you hold it and stand near your companions, as if you could take on the world." So we do get some unique stuff within this item description. Like we're getting something here that we're not going to get with other items. We learn a little bit more about the world, that there are Valian courtesans that use trinkets that might be charmed or enchanted so that they can do better work. And it even gives a little bit of a personal flair to it, saying that you do feel more invigorated when you're around your companions. So there's something about other people being nearby. But you'll notice that's different than the item description we saw in Pillars of Eternity, where it's talking about the person who created this accessory, for example, or about the last person who wore it, who imbued some of their essence into it. And I know some people might look at that and think that that is a loss, that is not as good as Pillars of Eternity, but personally speaking, I think it's just a different approach. Partly because Avowed and Pillars of Eternity are two very different games, and so you have a very different mindset. In Pillars of Eternity, you better be open to doing a lot of reading, because that's a lot of what the game is. But this game is a lot more action-focused, and it's also a lot more player-character-focused. In Pillars of Eternity, you're focusing on all of your companions and yourself, because you are a party. In this game, it is you, the player character, with your companions at your side. And so how you even approach the lore on unique items, I think also needs to match psychologically, if that makes sense, on like how much you're going to read, how it relates to you, the character specifically. And as well, if I am correct in my assumption that your watcher character is reading the memories off of these items from Pillars of Eternity, if the envoy in Avowed isn't a watcher, they wouldn't have that same ability to get that level of detail out of it. And so to be consistent, you would want to make sure that you have a different approach for how you write the unique lore and descriptions for these items. But that doesn't mean there aren't any history or any lore within these objects as well. There's a unique accessory, again, called the Band of Transcendent Suffering. This is a ring that we can get in Avowed. And it reads, an ancient elf monk that adhered strictly to the Shattered Pillar philosophy created this ring as a last act of their long life. This ring causes the wearer's entire body to tingle with barely restrained power as barbs of pure essence latch onto their soul. The strength that it imbues the wearer is undeniable, but it draws upon the very life of the wearer to do so. Truly, using this band is the ultimate show of confidence that one has in their own prowess. It has the unique trait of mortification. You deal 10% damage, but you also take 10% damage. This is very much related to the monk class that we see in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. But again, yes, to go back to the comparisons of unique descriptions, we definitely see that there is no named person. Like, we don't know who made this ring. We don't know the person who used it last. We just know that there was an elf monk that crafted this ring and that they were part of the Shattered Pillar philosophy. Now, you as the envoy, you are a powerful character, you are associated with magic, so perhaps you are getting some of this information through the essence, but a lot of it seems, again, to be very almost first-person focused. After the little bit at the beginning, it talks about the rings causes tingling in your body. You can feel barbs of pure essence latching onto the soul. This is all stuff that your character would feel if they wore the ring. And so there's this description of what it's doing through kind of the lens of your own personal experience. But we do also have that stuff at the top, or the beginning of this, saying this ancient elf monk that adhered strictly to the Shattered Pillar philosophy, which is a particular order of monks. The Shattered Pillar is an order of monks. It is a particular philosophy that some monks hold to. It's mostly about inflicting harm and damage to other people rather than yourself, but we're not going to get into that here. And as a last example, I'll use another ring, unique accessory called Bitter Bonding, which has the item description of draining, 10% of weapon damage is restored as health. The item description reads, marriage practices and wedding ceremonies in Eora vary drastically depending on where they take place. One universal constant is a symbol of that bond, be it not tied around the lover's wrists, matching rings, or other exotic practices. Not all such marriages are happy affairs, however, but rather matters of politics and diplomacy. This particular ring has been so suffused with its original owner's spite and bitterness that it now feeds off of the pain its wearer brings to others. So I'm happy to read descriptions like this. Not for the story is a little bit sad, actually, a person who is in an unhappy marriage, but I'm happy to read item descriptions like this because it does still give us some lore. It talks about marriage practices, it alludes to it a little bit, but it also references the essence that's trapped within this ring. Whoever the person was that owned this ring last had some spite and bitterness to it that causes the magical effects that it has. Now, again, we're missing the name and the identity of these people, but that might just be because your envoy character in Avowed doesn't have the same capacities as the Watcher character. And again, as another disclaimer, we haven't seen nearly all or at all of the unique items that are in Avowed. There is apparently a lot more out there, and so who knows? They might be very Pillars of Eternity-esque. I'm noticing a little bit of differences in terms of composition and some of the information we get. Again, I don't think it's bad. I think it's different. And personally, I actually kind of like it for the approach that Avowed has, which again is more action focused and more single player focused, in the sense of like we're focusing on just one character rather than a party of people, despite the fact that companions are important. That is the lore behind unique items, why they exist, how they exist, and how it is that these characters can get information off of them. I don't 100% know why our Envoy character can soak up some of this memory or understand some of this lore. Perhaps some of it is just common knowledge. Perhaps they do have an ability to read some of the essence. We don't know. Haven't played the game yet. Either way, there does seem to be a little bit of a difference. Not that it's good or bad, just different. And it's really cool to kind of contrast this. I get a lot of lore from unique items in Pillars of Eternity, and this show's existed for 3 years now. So you can see the quality of writing that spans across Obsidian games in general, not just these ones. Heck, I almost started a podcast like this about the lore from Tyranny, for example. The writing at Obsidian is good, and they do that in all of their worlds. But that's what this episode is about. So thanks everyone for listening to today's episode on that. Now, I guess we can ask the question what it might have to do with Avowed, but we kind of already know, don't we? Like, we're going to see unique items in Avowed. We're going to have a chance to read these item descriptions, get lore out of it, understand a little bit more about the world, how it works on a mechanical level, since that's going to be inherent in the Avowed game. So really, all we need to do is close out the episode.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at World of Eora, where you can ask questions about the show, point out any errors and inconsistencies, request a topic, or just chat about games if you've been playing Pillars of Eternity, or if you're excited about Avowed, or whatever you've been playing lately, or if you have something important you want to say. I love having conversations about this kind of a thing. So worldofeora@gmail.com is a place to do that. You can also follow me on Twitter at World of Eora if you want to know when episodes are out, what they're going to be about, or just keep up with any news that I also happens to come across my feed. And lastly, if you would like to support the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. No updates on what I've been playing. I've jumped back into Grounded for a little bit, but I've talked about that in episodes long ago. Grounded is a great game, Obsidian title. Love it. I have my gaming crew getting back together, playing that a little more often. We're also trying to rope some other people in, and it's just been a blast getting back into it. At the time of the recording, I'm looking forward to playing Shadows of Doubt in the future, as well as Super Mario Wonder with my son. Shadows of Doubt, not with my son. Shadows of Doubt will be just for me, but we'll see how that goes. I haven't started it up yet. I want to finish that level on Astrobot, and I also want to just kind of get some other gaming stuff out of the way. But that's everything for today. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm your host, Eric aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.